try that.
Well, I have an 11-year-old son who loves football, and love is probably not a strong enough term for it. Like, he's extremely passionate about it. When football season ends in mid-February for the rest of Americans, preseason starts at our house. It starts with every game from every team we watch constantly for the next 215 days. And he examines the players, he examines the teams, and he likes to criticize the refs a little bit too. But the NFL gets about 2 months off or 5 months off, and the Smith house gets no months off. So it's really great. It doesn't stop with him just watching football though. Like, he talks about football constantly, plays football too. So about for 4 years, he has been playing football organized. And for those of you who have been parents of kids that run organized sports, you know that that means volunteers. Volunteering comes from the parents. So this year I was volunteering on the sidelines, which was kind of cool to be able to be right on the field as my son was playing and his teammates. And as we were doing that, I noticed a few things about the players. So they were constantly trying to one-up each other. And it would usually start with, oh, did you see my catch? And then it would be like, yeah, but did you see my pick six? Yeah, but it couldn't have happened without my block. And most of the time I just giggled and kind of blew it off. But then what I started noticing is that they were so much more concerned with one-upping their teammates that they weren't even paying attention to the game that was going on the field. Instead of watching the game, cheering on the teammates that were on the field, strategizing how they were going to win, they were too busy trying to make sure that their greatness was noticed. So the truth is that I don't think this is just something that happens in Pee Wee football. I think that if we are being honest, there's a tension that we all face where we are pursuing greatness for ourselves and that comes at the expense of somebody else. We have this tension of comparison. And some examples that I know that I've experienced just thinking about like work and sitting in a room hearing about all the accolades of a coworker, and then internally I'm going, well, I do this for the company and I do this and I do this. Or coming home from a really hard day at work and just feeling like I need to put my feet up, I need to take a breath, and my spouse comes in and starts railing on his day, and all I can think about is my day was harder than your day. How are you complaining? Instead of just going, we don't have to compare ourselves. So maybe neither of those examples resonates with you, but I think we can all think of a time when we felt like our greatness was being overshadowed by someone else's. And it's not really a new struggle for human race in general. We see it lots of times in the Bible. There's Cain and Abel, two brothers who brought an offering to the Lord, and one of them didn't bring an offering that was fit. The Lord didn't approve of it. And so he got jealous, angry, killed his brother. And we see Joseph and his brothers, and his father loved Joseph more than any of the other brothers. And so the brothers got angry, they hated him. What makes matters worse is Joseph wasn't really smart about it, and he starts telling them about these dreams that he's having, where he's going to reign over them, which makes his brothers even angrier. And so they just decide, they conspire that they're going to take him, kill him, and then they end up selling him to some merchants who take him to Egypt. Then there's Saul and David. And David fought so many battles for King Saul and was so very successful, and he gained high status in the army right away. One of the battles that he came home from, people in the streets were chanting, Saul has slain his thousands and David his tens of thousands. And Saul immediately became angry. And his response was, they have credited David with tens of thousands, but me with only thousands. What more can he get than the kingdom? He was so concerned that David was going to come and take his kingdom away from him that he didn't even acknowledge that the win was for his entire community. Even the disciples, who were literally in physical contact with the greatest person on the earth, struggled with this. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. So in Mark chapter 9, we can see the disciples doing this exact same thing that my son's football team is doing, that these people in the Bible were doing. They're arguing with each other about who's going to be greater. So I'm going to give you a little bit of backstory just before we get into the actual scripture. So the disciples and Jesus are just returning to Capernaum. Jesus had just got done healing a little boy from an evil spirit that the disciples weren't even able to cast out the spirit themselves. And so as they're walking together as a group. I imagine a few of them are just straggling back a little bit, and they're arguing with one another about, okay, why couldn't we do that? How did Jesus do that? Why aren't we greater? Who's greater? So this continues, and then they arrive at the house, and Jesus asks them, what are you arguing about? And they're just silent. They don't answer, and they're somewhat embarrassed. So the night proceeds, and Jesus says to them, Anyone who wants to be first must be the very last. They must be the servant of everyone. And as if John did not even hear what Jesus said, he pipes in and says, "We saw someone driving out demons in your name, and we told him to stop because he was not one of us." Right there, John draws a line and says, you're either on our team or you're not on our team. And he decided who was on the team, even though the people who were trying to align themselves with Jesus is who he was trying to compete against. So it was like if John was one of the boys on my son's football team and the coach had just given John the answer of how he could win this game. And instead he says, hey, my teammates, the ones on the defense, they don't really know what they're doing. They're not offense. They're not as good as me. They can't do this. They can't win. What John didn't realize is that the men who were trying to align themselves with Jesus were on the same team because he was so much more concerned and worried about his personal greatness being overshadowed. And so what I think is in our desire to self-protect, we position ourselves to compete with everyone else. Instead of recognizing that we are on the same team and we're wearing the same jerseys, we focus on the sidelines and positioning ourselves to being the greatest while ignoring the fact that we actually have a team that we're playing against. There's an actual opponent. So let's keep looking at this a little bit more and look at Jesus' interaction with the disciples. So Mark chapter 9, 39 through 40. So Jesus responds, "Do not stop him, for no one who does a miracle in my name can in the next moment say anything bad about me. For whoever is not against us is for us." Whoever is not against us is for us. I have to admit, I took a lot of time just to read that statement over and over again, because I quickly translated it to the Matthew version that says, if they aren't for us, they're against us. In essence, both these statements say the same thing, but in my mind, it was much easier to focus on who's against us than who's for us. And I think that was because I failed to define who they were. I was defining they as my coworker who did the same job as me but had flashier stats, or maybe the teammate who had major plays and we only scored a few, or the church down the street who is reaching more people for Jesus because they're doing something different. And so we put all these people into the category or the position of the enemy, but that's not who they are. So think back to my son's football team. The focus was that they wanted to beat one another. Meanwhile, there's a team on the field who is playing in a different jersey, trying to defeat them. And that's exactly what the enemy is trying to do to us. We have an actual enemy, someone who is against us, someone who is trying to pin each of us against one another so that the world will know us more by what we're against than what we're for. The enemy is positioning us to fight each other instead of love one another. And the enemy is causing destruction and separation within our team, within our church, within our community, and shifting our focus and taking one another out instead of defeating him. So there's a great book called Fervent by Priscilla Schreier, and I love so much what she says in here, and it articulates it so well. She says, "If I were your enemy, I'd disguise myself and manipulate your perspectives so that you'd focus on the wrong culprit. Your husband, your friend, your hurt, your finances, anything or anyone except me. Because when you zero in on the most convenient and obvious places to strike back against your problems, you get the impression you're fighting for something, even though all you're really doing is just fighting for nothing. There are people who are going to miss seeing who Jesus is because we're fighting for nothing. There are people who are going to miss seeing who Jesus is because we're insistent on being right, on protecting our pride, on comparing our greatness, and more specifically, our purpose to anyone else. Who you were created to be is in direct relation to the purpose God has placed in you. And there's a hurting world who's only going to know who Jesus is because of who God made you to be. And it's not by some random chance at a random place and time that this is the moment that you exist. And these are the gifts that you were given. And at the same token, there's a hurting world who will know who Jesus is because of the people that God made to be in the church down the street. John 13:35 says, "Your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples." Our goal shouldn't be to overshadow someone else's purpose. Our light doesn't burn brighter by blowing someone else's out. So I want to show you this through an example. So let's pretend these are two people. And each of them has a light within them that God has placed. Each light shines, and they don't have to compete with each other. This one shines over here, and this one is shining over here. But instead of just working on shining our own light or coming together, we want to put this one out. And we're wanting to be where they are, or we're wanting to do what they do, meanwhile missing our entire purpose. And so the thing that I think is so beautiful, instead of focusing on who they are and who we're not, if we would just own our purpose and bring our lights together, it creates one much larger flame. So I just want to challenge you. I want to go back to the beginning when I talked about David and Saul. When Saul was so upset that David had been getting credit for tens of thousands and he was only getting credit for 1,000. If he would have taken a minute and went, together we're the 11,000 club, he would have had so much more purpose and value in what he was doing instead of belittling himself and becoming angry and jealous. So don't let comparison make us forget that our lights are shining for his glory and not ours. Together we get to shine brighter to magnify his light. And so I just want to leave you with one question to think about as you kind of wrap this up in your own brain and see where are you sitting? Is the world going to know you more by how you love one another, or are they going to know you more because you were striving for your own greatness? Let's pray together. God, thank you so much for